Oscar Piastri, after Miami, has just won his 6th Formula 1 Grand Prix and has also become only the 4th different driver in the hybrid era to win 3 races in a row. Amongst his generation of drivers, that now means that he has more wins than Lando Norris, George Russell, and Carlos Sainz, and it also means that he's now just 2 wins away from Charles Leclerc and just the 58 wins away from Max Verstappen. Within the same week as Piastri achieving all of that, at the other end of the grid, Alpine, the team that technically brought him into Formula 1, are now continuing their toxic struggle with their team principal resigning and with Jack Doohan being replaced by Franco Colapinto after just 6 races. That irony of Piastri thriving and Alpine continuing to struggle with their driver lineup, which is a direct consequence of them fumbling Piastri, cannot be underestimated. In a way, every single time that Oscar wins a race, it's like a never-ending slap in the face of Alpine that not only did they fumble him, but they also fumbled the potential of having Piastri and Alonso as their driver lineup during a period where, let's not forget, they were better than McLaren. If we rewind the clock back just 3 years ago, on paper Alpine were in a really good place as they finished 4th in the Constructors' Championship, only behind Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes. However, in reality 2022 was the year where this team really started to collapse. Although they nailed the aero side of the brand new ground effect regulations, their power unit was both underpowered, which is still true even to this day, but more importantly, it was unreliable with both Ocon and Alonso suffering numerous reliability-related DNFs. Alpine at that point had the potential to be something great. They had the potential to be successful, and more importantly, they had more than enough drivers that could get them there. After Ricciardo decided to abandon the Renault project at the end of 2020, it seemed like Alpine could potentially be in a little bit of trouble with no championship caliber drivers available to lead the team. Fernando Alonso coming out of retirement was actually massively controversial in the eyes of some of the fans, many of whom saw him as just an older driver blocking a seat from younger talent. The doubters in the end were all proved wrong, as Fernando Alonso was better than anyone expected for him to be on his return, and he even garnered a brand new generation of fans that had never seen him race before. Between 2021 and 2022, although there were moments of tension between Ocon and Alonso, in terms of results, they were easily one of the best driver lineups on the grid. They saved Alpine's reputation after Ricciardo clearly showed that he didn't have faith in the team. And whilst this should have been a launching pad for future success, the reality is that the toxic and incompetent management had already started to destroy the team from within. Alpine in 2022 had a very clear 3-2 driver decision to solve. They already had Ocon and Alonso as their drivers, but they also had their own junior driver, Piastri, sitting on the sidelines. And now Piastri's single-seater resume is about as complete as anyone could possibly have. He won 3 consecutive championships in 3 years, winning Renault Euro Cup in 2019, Formula 3 in 2020, and Formula 2 in 2021. Although he did get F1 mileage testing older Alpines, having to spend a year on the sidelines isn't good for any young driver's development, and for 2023, there was no way that Oscar Piastri wasn't going to be in Formula 1, with the only question being, which team would he be driving for? A complication is that Esteban Ocon already had a long-term contract signed until 2024, whilst Alonso and Piastri were the drivers out of contract. Initially, their plan was to re-sign Alonso alongside Ocon and to loan out Oscar Piastri to Williams to make his F1 debut. However, this is where the management didn't realize that although they thought that they were holding all of the cards, they were not even playing the same game as their drivers. Fernando Alonso, after outperforming everyone's expectations on his return, rightly felt that what his result warranted was a long-term deal, and so he was chasing at least a firm 2-year commitment from Alpine. Instead, however, they tried to play hardball with Fernando, offering him a 1+1 year deal, with the second year being an option on the team side. Fernando saw this as not only disrespectful, but also insulting, because essentially what Alpine was saying is that we do not trust you to be good enough for the next 2 or 3 years, and in a year's time anyway, we want to have the option to kick you out of the team to potentially make way for Piastri. Alpine genuinely thought that they were holding all of the cards and that their drivers had no other options. However, not for the last time, they got humbled very quickly. Fernando is not the type of character who takes being disrespected to very easily, and so over the course of less than a day, he simply phoned up Lawrence Stroll, agreed on a 3-year deal, signed the contract, and to the shock of the entire paddock, seemingly overnight, he was out of the Alpine business. With Fernando out of the picture, Alpine CEO Laurent Rossi and team principal Otmar Szafnauer announced the following day that Oscar Piastri would be promoted to Formula 1 to replace Fernando. However, Oscar Piastri via social media then posted his infamous tweet rejecting the claims they had signed a contract with Alpine or that they had any right to confirm him as their race driver, and we would soon find out that this is because, whilst Alpine were busy negotiating with Fernando, Piastri, who was contractually available for 2023, simply signed with McLaren instead. Szafnauer would come out and accuse Piastri of lacking integrity, and as you'd expect, Alpine also tried to fight this. But the Contract Recognition Board ruled that McLaren were the only ones who had a legally binding race contract with Piastri, and so in the eyes of Formula 1, the matter was closed. This was a classic case of pure negligence and a lack of commitment, specifically from CEO Laurent Rossi. Instead of simply committing to either Piastri or Alonso and living with the consequences of losing the other, he tried to hedge his bet by trying to keep both of them, thinking that he had all of the power, and in the end, by not committing to either of them, he ended up losing both. The great irony to all of this is that when you look at the drivers that were available to them in Ocon, Alonso and Piastri, any combination of those 3 drivers would have been a really good driver lineup to have for the next 2 or 3 years. Ocon has remained a solid midfield driver capable of scoring podiums. Fernando proved the following season that he was still a top driver in Formula 1, and Piastri, as we have seen, has gone on to become a championship caliber driver. With the team scrambling to find a replacement driver, they were lucky enough that their own turmoil coincided with Pierre Gasly looking to leave AlphaTauri and the Red Bull family, and so in the end, pairing Ocon and Gasly, which was still worse than what they would have had with either Alonso or Piastri, ended up actually being a lot better than what Alpine deserved. To say that fumbling Piastri would go on to have consequences for Alpine would be an understatement. Within a year, CEO Laurent Rossi, the man ultimately responsible for mishandling Piastri's contract, would first be removed as CEO and transferred to something called Special Project at Alpine, and very quickly that special project would turn out to be Rossi being sacked by Alpine entirely. Otmar Szafnauer, who over the years has tried to wash his hands clean of any responsibility, also didn't last that much longer, being sacked a year later and replaced by Bruno Faman, who himself was replaced by Oliver Oakes, who himself has just been replaced by Flavio Briatore. And now there is always the interesting question of what exactly would have happened to Piastri had he never gone to McLaren and had he stayed at Alpine. The thing about this question is that although it's fun to think about that he's ended up on the right path and the path that has led him to being a race winner and potentially even champion in the future, it means that the Alpine alternative is always going to be less interesting. There is no doubt that he would have hit the ground running as a rookie in 23 alongside Esteban Ocon, and that he would have been a reliable point scorer. However, given how savvy his manager Mark Webber is, and the fact that he got Oscar out of Alpine in real life, I just do not see a scenario where Oscar stays at Alpine beyond his rookie season, and certainly not beyond 2024. Given that Oscar, as a rookie, was already good enough to be winning a sprint race for McLaren against the likes of Lando Norris and Max Verstappen, I think in a decent midfield and also podium-scoring car like the Alpine was in 23, I think he would have been able to show enough talent and promise as a rookie for the top teams to want to sign him anyway. To me, I just do not see a scenario where he is still at Alpine now, especially given how bad their car was at the beginning of last year, and to me, I think regardless of where he made his debut, I think in his second season he was always going to be picked up by either McLaren anyway, or potentially even Red Bull. In terms of McLaren, let's not forget that the reason why they swooped in for Piastri in the first place is because they were having problems with an underperforming Daniel Ricciardo. Ricciardo had a big money 3-year contract with McLaren, which would have seen him stay at the team until 2023, when Oscar would have made his debut for Alpine. At the time, outside of Piastri, because most of the established top-tier drivers were all locked into contracts, there wasn't that many alternatives for McLaren who were available. So much so that even IndyCar drivers like Pato O'Ward were being linked to potentially replace Ricciardo. Had Piastri not been available, I think McLaren, with no better alternatives, probably would have chosen to bite the bullet and keep Ricciardo to finish his 3-year contract into 23, and at that point, given that we know that Mark Webber and Zak Brown were in contact, because of how things played out in real life, I think Zak then just signs Oscar outright, or buys him out of his Alpine contract to replace Ricciardo in 2024. I just do not see a world in which Piastri and Mark Webber, being as smart as they are, choose to stay at Alpine beyond his rookie season, especially with how competitive McLaren was starting to look at the end of 2023 in the hands of Lando Norris. What actually happened in real life and what we know to be true has a massive influence on the alternative reality, because we know that even in 2022, Zak Brown already had a massive interest in Oscar from very early on. There was already a desire from Piastri and Webber to get him out of Alpine, and then coupled with the performance trajectory of the McLaren being a lot better than the Alpine, I think Oscar would have always ended up at McLaren even if he would have had to wait an extra season driving for Alpine as a rookie. The other team that I think 100% would have also been in the running to sign Piastri during his rookie season for 2024 is Red Bull. Even in 2022, Horner himself admitted that he regretted not being able to sign Oscar to the Red Bull program, and given Mark Webber's relationship with Red Bull, I think some kind of talks or negotiations between him, Horner, and Marco would have almost been inevitable. Keep in mind, in 2023, Red Bull and Max Verstappen are dominating Formula 1 with the most dominant car in the history of the sport. Max scored enough points by himself to win the Constructors' Championship, and although Checo was driving well enough, I do not see Horner and Marco passing up on the opportunity to sign Oscar Piastri. This was also during a time when, let's not forget, Red Bull was actually struggling to find drivers. In 22, they considered signing Colton Herta from IndyCar. Then after Gasly left the Red Bull family, they abandoned their own junior program and instead for 23 signed Nick De Vries before kicking him out mid-season and bringing back Daniel Ricciardo. Oscar being available potentially could have solved a lot of their problems, and putting myself in Oscar's shoes, if the team that is about to win 21 out of 22 races comes calling for you to drive for them alongside Max, would that have been an impossible option to turn away? Or given the choice, would he have still chosen to sign for McLaren over Red Bull anyway? The problem with the Red Bull option is that even though I think the 2025 version of Oscar would be ready to jump into a team with Max right now, the 2024 version of Oscar, who was only in his second season of Formula 1, still had a lot of developing to do. Last year, although he improved massively and won races, he was still comprehensively outperformed by Lando Norris and massively inconsistent with his tyre management and especially with his qualifying pace. Going to Red Bull as a second-year driver alongside Max, with all of that pressure and expectation that surrounds that second Red Bull seat, I think it would have stunted his development, and I just do not think that he would have been able to develop as quickly into the championship caliber driver that he is today in the Red Bull environment compared to the McLaren environment. There is a saying in life that everything happens for a reason, and now whether or not you believe in destiny or fate, in the case of Oscar Piastri, I genuinely believe that the path that he has taken was the absolute best one for him. Making his debut with Alpine in 2023 definitely wouldn't have been better, and alternatively, then going to Red Bull for 2024, I also don't think would have been the best thing for him. The path that he has taken going to McLaren, developing with the team when they themselves were struggling in early 23, and now being here to capitalize when they've become the best team in Formula 1 to lead the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship, Everything happened for a reason, and everything happened in the best way that it possibly could have for Oscar Piastri. Oscar right now, winning races in the best car in Formula 1, deserves to reap the rewards of his hard work and the choices that he and his management have made to get him here. Alpine, in contrast, also deserve every single day to watch Oscar win races and be reminded that, because of their own incompetence and ego, they hold the title as the biggest fumblers in Formula 1 history. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.